GLC presents, brought to you by the donations of our faithful partners.
Shalom, I'm Eddie Chumney of Hebraic Heritage Ministries, and we welcome you today to our study on the Hebraic roots of Christianity. We need to remember that when we're studying the Hebraic roots of Christianity, we must keep everything centered on Yeshua the Messiah. That is because it is written in Psalm chapter 40, verse 7, "Then said I, Lo, I come, in the volume of the book, it is written of me." That verse is quoted in Hebrews in chapter 10 and verse 7, referring to Yeshua the Messiah. That in the volume of the Scriptures, it is all written of him. Yeshua himself affirmed this in Luke in chapter 24 and verse 44, where Yeshua spoke these words. "These are the words which I spoke unto you while I was yet with you, that all things must be fulfilled which were written in the Torah of Moses and in the prophets and in the Psalms concerning me." So Yeshua said that the Hebrew Scriptures is written of him, that the Torah is written of him. Now, we have explicit verses in the New Testament that allows us to see Yeshua in the Torah. For example, we're told in John chapter 1, verse 3, Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 and 16, that Yeshua created the heavens and the earth. We are told in Galatians chapter 3 and verse 16 that Yeshua made covenant with Abraham, and that if you are a believer in Yeshua as the Messiah, you are heirs of the covenant promises that was made to Abraham. Galatians in chapter 3 and verse 29. It was Yeshua who delivered the children of Israel out of Egypt. He was the rock that was with them in the wilderness. 1 Corinthians in chapter 10 and verses 1 through 4. Pharaoh and his army were defeated by the right hand. Exodus in chapter 15 and verse 6. Yeshua is the right hand of the Father. And in Hebraic thought, the hand or the right hand represents power, strength, deliverance, salvation. So that is who Yeshua is. He brings deliverance or salvation to his people. Yeshua was the cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night that led the children of Israel in the wilderness. Yeshua is the glory of the Lord that filled the tabernacle, as we're told in Exodus in chapter 40. And this corresponds to Revelation in chapter 21 and verse 23, speaking about the New Jerusalem. "And the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light." The Lamb is the light of the glory of God. The glory of God filled the tabernacle. Then Yeshua is the one who gave the Torah at Mount Sinai. He's the lawgiver. And we're told in James chapter 4, verse 12, that there is one lawgiver that is able to save. The one that is able to save is also the lawgiver. We know the one that saves is Yeshua, the Messiah. But the lawgiver is also the bridegroom. And there was a marriage that took place on Mount Sinai, Jeremiah in chapter 2 and verses 1 through 3. And the bride of the Messiah is the house of Jacob. Exodus in chapter 19, verse 3, who said when the marriage was offered to her in Exodus chapter 19, verse 8, "All that the Lord has spoken, we will do." So Moses was an escort of the bride, that is the house of Jacob, the nation of Israel, to meet Yahweh Yeshua at Mount Sinai. Exodus chapter 19, verse 17, where there would be an exchanging of vows. However, the bride of Messiah was unfaithful in keeping those vows. And as a result, she was exiled into the nations of the world and being kicked out of his house. The house that the bride of Messiah was kicked out of is the land of Israel. Then it was the Assyrians who took the northern kingdom captivity, and it was the Babylonians who took the southern kingdom captivity. However, this exile is not an eternal punishment, but it is for the glory of the Messiah when he would redeem and gather them from their exile. Then we're told regarding this in Jeremiah in chapter 31, verse 10, "Hear the word of the Lord, O ye nations, and declare it in the isles afar off." So one of the isles which we are to declare it is in the United States of America. So that's why we're sharing the gospel of the kingdom and the role of the Messiah to gather and unite the 12 tribes of Israel to our American audience, but to people all over the world through satellites. And so the isles are hearing this message. "And say to the isles, he that scattered Israel will gather him." The one that scattered Israel. Who scattered Israel? The lawgiver and the bridegroom will gather Israel and keep him as a shepherd does his flock. The nation of Israel is likened unto sheep. And it's the good shepherd who's going to gather the lost or the sheep that strayed away. Yeshua is that good shepherd, John chapter 10 and verse 11 and verse 14. And in conversation with the Pharisees or the Jews or the house of Judah in John chapter 10, Yeshua explained to them in John chapter 10 verse 16, "Other sheep I have, which are not of this fold. Them also I must bring, and they will hear my voice." So Yeshua said he has, before he died on the tree, another sheepfold besides the sheepfold that he was speaking to. He was speaking to the Pharisees or the Jews or the house of Judah. So who's the other sheepfold that he has besides the house of Judah? It's the house of Israel. It's the 10 tribes. It's Ephraim. It is the northern kingdom. And they will hear his voice. It is prophesied in Hosea in chapter 1 in verse 10 that it will come to pass in the place where it was said, "You are not my people," there you will be called the sons of God. And who is the Son of God? John chapter 1 verse 12. It's a believer in Yeshua as the Messiah. So there's a prophecy that those of the northern kingdom would believe that Yeshua is the Messiah, as Yeshua explained to the Pharisees or the Jews or the house of Judah, John chapter 10 verse 16, and they will hear his voice. Well, in Exodus chapter 19, when he was coming to the house of Jacob, he says, "If you will hear my voice and keep my covenant." Hearing his voice is following his Torah. So Yeshua said that ultimately the people that believe that he's the Messiah will express their faith in him by following his Torah. And then he says there'll be one fold and one shepherd. There's going to be uniting of the two sheepfolds, make them one. He is the good shepherd over them. This will happen in messianic times when Yeshua sets his feet down on the Mount of Olives, sets up his kingdom. He will rule over 12 tribes united, no longer in exile. But in order for this to come about, Yeshua explains in John 10:17, "Therefore does my Father love me, because I lay down my life." Because he needed to lay down his life to forgive the sins of his bride for breaking the covenant, for being unfaithful. That if she would repent of her sin, sin is the transgression of the Torah, 1 John chapter 3, verse 4, that he would forgive her of her sins and renew the relationship. This is called the new covenant, which was made to the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Jeremiah 31, verse 31, Hebrews in chapter 8 and verse 8. And the New Testament is an account of the role of the Messiah to gather and unite the 12 tribes of Israel, and a detailed explanation of how it is going to happen. So we're sharing with you these programs, Yeshua's earthly ministry, and showing you how the things that happened in Yeshua's earthly ministry, they were literal events. They also, at the same time, were prophetic declarations, prophetic foreshadowings of his rule to gather and unite the 12 tribes of Israel. And so we are now looking at John chapter 11. And John chapter 11 is an account of the resurrection of Lazarus. Lazarus represents the exiles of Israel. Lazarus means whom God helps. And the one whom is helped are the exiles of Israel. And he's from Bethany. Bethany is the house of the poor, or the house of the afflicted. And the exiles of Israel, being in exile, they are afflicted by their enemies. And Bethany is the town of two sisters, Mary and Martha. Their names mean rebellious, and they're prophetic of northern kingdom, southern kingdom, who are likened unto sisters, Ezekiel in chapter 23. However, it was said of Lazarus in John 11, verse 4, that the sickness was not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God, or the Messiah, would be glorified. The exile into the nations of the world is not an eternal punishment. It is for the glory of the Messiah, that when he gathers them, brings them back to the land, that in this process, Yeshua will be glorified. Now, this is going to happen after 2 days or 2,000 years from Yeshua's first coming. That is why we're told in John 11, verse 6, that he abode there for 2 days. It represents 2,000 years. Hosea chapter 6, in verses 1 and 2, that at the beginning of the third day, which is the day of the Lord, and the beginning of the third day is the tribulation period. That is when the exiles of Israel are going to be gathered. So Yeshua explained that if you believe in him, that he is the light of the world, John chapter 11 and verse 9, and that if you believe in him, you do not walk in darkness. If you believe that Yeshua is the Messiah, you have salvation. And you won't walk in darkness. The Spirit of God will reveal to you, if you're searching and seeking for him with all your heart, not only that Yeshua is the Messiah, but he's the lawgiver. And you're to express your faith in him by following and keeping his Torah. John chapter 11, verse 11, it was said of Lazarus that I'm going to go and awaken him out of his sleep. This is a prophetic picture that Lazarus, who represents the exiles of Israel, that they're in spiritual slumber. They've broken the covenant, and they need to be awakened that Yeshua is the Messiah, and they need to follow his Torah. And this is where we're going to be picking things up in this program. And we are going to look at John chapter 11 and verse 19, where it says, "And many of the Jews came to Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother." Notice it's the Jews who is bringing comfort to Mary and Martha regarding the situation with Lazarus. Remember, what does Lazarus represent? The exile of the nation of Israel. And how do religious Jews view the exile? Ultimately, while it is long, it is at the same time just temporary. Because there's going to come a day when there's the end of the exile, and the Messiah is going to come, gather the exiles of Israel, and set up his kingdom. And so that is the comfort while you are in exile. And it's the Jews who primarily have this belief and this thought process in their daily religious beliefs. And so that's why they're the ones that's bringing the comfort. Now, comfort is biblically associated with ending the exile of the 12 tribes of Israel. We're going to see how this is so. We're going to begin by looking at Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 1, which says, comfort ye, my people, says your God." And who is he going to comfort? Isaiah chapter 51, verse 3. "The Lord will comfort Zion And so what is the comfort of Zion? It says he will comfort all her waste places. Her waste places is exile. And make her wilderness, that's exile, like Eden. That's the Messianic era. And her desert, that's exile, like the garden of the Lord. That is the Messianic era. Joy and gladness shall be found therein. Thanksgiving and the voice of melody. The thanksgiving and the voice of melody is marriage talk. That the gathering of the exiles of Israel is going to be likened to the joy of a wedding. There's going to be a reunification of northern kingdom with southern kingdom. Now let's look at Jeremiah chapter 31, verse 13. Then will the virgin rejoice in the dance, both young men and old together. I will turn their mourning, that is exile, into joy. That's the end of the exile. And in turning their mourning into joy, I will comfort them. Their joy is associated with their comfort. Their comfort is, then will the virgin rejoice in the dance. It is likened to the joy of a marriage. So the unification of the 12 tribes of Israel is likened to a marriage. It's likened unto joy, celebration, and it is comfort, because there is no more exile. There's no more the enemies of the nation of Israel to rule and reign over them with cruelty. Now, in the traditional annual cycle of studying and reading the Torah that is and has been done for many years by the Jewish people, that at a certain point of the year, there are readings from the prophets regarding the comfort to the nation of Israel regarding their situation in exile. And there are 7 weeks out of the year where there's readings from the prophets in succession regarding this comfort. And these words of comfort are happening during the period of the year where there is a mourning over the exile and the situation with Jerusalem. And so let's look at these 7 haftorot of comfort. Rabbi Avraham ben David of Lanil, the author of Sefer HaMahig, Sefer means book, he writes the following. From the Parashah Breshit, that is the weekly Torah reading, in Genesis, through the 17th of Tammuz, that is on the Jewish calendar, the Haftorah, which is the reading from the prophets that corresponds with the reading of the Torah, that it is chosen to correspond to the Parsha, or the weekly Torah topic. And it's done each week. What is chosen from the prophets is chosen according to match the topic of the Torah portion. But from the 17th of Tammuz on, the next 7 weeks, the choice of the reading from the prophets, which is the Haftorah, is determined entirely by the time of the year and the corresponding historical events. The time of the year is the mourning over Jerusalem and the exile, and the historical events is the destruction of the first and second temples. On the 9th of Av, on the Jewish calendar, marks the destruction of the first temple and the second temples. Both were destroyed on the Jewish calendar on the 9th of Av. And 3 Haftorot, that is readings from the prophets, in 3 successive weeks, are known as the 3 Haftorot of punishment. And they are read on the 3 Sabbaths that precede the 9th of Av. However, on the Sabbath following the 9th of Av, there begins the series of the 7 Haftorot of comfort or consolation. Now you remember Simeon in the New Testament. He was waiting for the consolation of Israel, the comfort of Israel. And the comfort of Israel that Simeon was waiting for was the coming of the Messiah to redeem and forgive the sins of the nation of Israel and to gather and unite the 12 tribes of Israel to end the exile. That was what Simeon was waiting to see. We understand in the scriptures that the fulfillment of this is through both the first and the second coming of the Messiah. So now let's look at the 7 haftorot of comfort. These are the 7 readings from the prophets that is going to correspond to the Torah portion that is going to be thematically connected to the season of the year. That is mourning over Jerusalem and the exile. So in the first week of the 7, we have the reading from Isaiah chapter 40 and verse 1, which says, be comforted, my people. Then the following week, we have the reading from Isaiah chapter 49, verse 14. Week 2. Zion said, the Lord has left me. The Lord has forgotten me. So the exiles of Israel, Zion is being told, be comforted. But Zion's reply is, but where is the Lord that delivers me from my exile? I'm not comforted. It seems like I'm forsaken. It seems like I am forgotten. Then we have the third week, where there's a reading from Isaiah chapter 54, verse 11, where we read, impoverished one who has endured storms. So the spiritual status of Zion is she's gone through storms. She's impoverished. And so that's what's told to her in the third week. Now in the fourth week's reading, it comes from Isaiah 51 verse 12, where Zion is told, I, even I, am the one who comforts you. It's myself who brings you comfort. Now, how ultimately does the Almighty bring comfort? When he pours out his Spirit upon Zion. And that's why it says in Isaiah, in chapter 35, Isaiah in chapter 35, verse 7, and the parched ground shall become a pool, and the thirsty land springs of water. And then it goes on to say, and the ransom of the Lord shall return and come to Zion. So, in delivering the exiles of Israel, before the deliverance comes, Zion is going through trials, tribulations, storm. And her land is likened unto a wilderness, likened unto parched ground. So when he pours out his Spirit, then the thirsty land becomes springs of water. So in the wilderness, you have to be thirsty for the God of Israel. You have to be crying out for him. You got to be seeking his face and praying for the outpouring of his Spirit. That's the thirsty land. Those who are thirsty in the wilderness. That's who he pours out his Spirit, and he brings springs of water. Now in the fifth week, we have this reading. Sing, you who were barren. And so Zion is told to sing because her comforter is going to comfort her. Then the sixth week, she's told to awaken out of her spiritual slumber. Arise, shine. Isaiah chapter 60, verse 1. And then in the seventh week, she's told, I will surely delight in the Lord. She's comforted, and she is going to delight in her deliverer, the one who brings her comfort. Now, these 7 weekly readings are structured to communicate a communication between the God of Israel and the exiles, Zion. And so, we look at this. The 7 haftorot of consolation can be viewed as a conversation between the Holy One, blessed be He, the people of Israel, and the prophets. On the first Sabbath, the Holy One says through the prophets, be comforted, my people. But the people refuse to accept the comforting words of the prophets. So that we hear on the second Sabbath, and Zion answered, the Lord has left me, the Lord has forgotten me. But on the third Sabbath, the prophets report to the Lord, the impoverished, the storm-tossed one has not been comforted. She refuses to accept comfort from us. She wants to hear it from you alone. Therefore, on the fourth Sabbath, the Holy One, blessed be He, assures the people, it is I, even I, who comfort you. The fifth Sabbath, she says, sing out, you who were barren, you had not been given birth. The sixth Sabbath, arise, give forth light, for your light has come. And then on the seventh Sabbath, it is only then that the people of Israel believe that her time of suffering is over, and she declares, I rejoice in the Lord, my soul will delight in my God. It's Yeshua who comforts the exiles of Israel when He comes and regathers them. Remember, if you believe in Yeshua as Messiah, you got to walk as He walked, 1 John chapter 2, verse 6. And He followed the Torah of His Father, and He commanded those who believe on Him to do the same. Shalom in Yeshua the Messiah. Amen.